One of my rules in the shop is that for every project I build, I have to organize two things. These rarely get filmed, but you can see the changes here. Since I've done a string of complicated projects, I thought it would be fun to do something a little more laid back. Lucky for me, while having breakfast with my wife at Cracker Barrel, I had that aha moment. After coming up with 4 designs, I took a poll and went with the highest rated one. I'm planning to sell some of these, but also give a few away to friends, family, and followers of the channel. I'll let you know how you can get one later in the video, but for now, let's work through the process. One thing about making things to give your friends and family, it doesn't really matter how efficient you are. That all changes if you decide to make a product to sell. So my initial plan is to make a prototype, not just for the look of it, but also to refine the process from there. So let's get started. I decided I wanted to use a piece of ash, but the only piece of ash I've got in here right now is super long. So I'm going to have to break this down and go from there. Here you can see a breakdown of what I plan to use for the bases. But the last one is something I've always wanted to try, and it turns out pretty freaking cool. As for the upper section, it was pretty much always going to be walnut. I wanted to use brass pegs, and I figure on the lighter woods it would just kind of blend in too much. You can see I added a pocket to the base. That's strictly for alignment of the top. As I sit here sanding this, I realize this is not the most efficient way to do this, but it does allow me to easily check the tolerances of that pocket. After fitting this in, something was off about the ratio of the top and bottom height. But for now, I'm optimistic and hope the bottom chamfer will make it look better. It does not. And this is another slight bottleneck in the process. This too gets some adjustment on the next rounds. Since this thing didn't really need to be bulletproof, I just used CA glue for this one. So this prototype to me left a lot to be desired. 1, I thought the top was too tall. 2, the 45-degree bit I used on the bottom, it wasn't going far enough down on the side, so I needed to change that bit out for something a little different. I was, however, satisfied with the contrast on this. Now that I figured out the design changes and updated the process, it was time to batch out a bunch of these. The top sections would now be 3/8 of an inch, and the bottom sections would become 11/16. These would have really gone fast if I wasn't trying to use up a bunch of scrap. So I want these about 1 3/4 inches long. So what I think I'll do is I'll drill into here, maybe cut here where I can clamp this to hold this in place, and then I can use this as a guide to cut it. Okay, so here's the plan. Take this, square that up. We're going to drill a hole here. Then cut this 1 3/4 inches so that the hole goes all the way through. Now we cut a slit through this, that way it can be clamped down tight. The next thing to do was adding a movable stop on the end. That way if the piece got hung in there, you could just slide it over and push it out. It's also worth noting that the even tension from this sleeve will help the brass keep from getting marred up. This actually wound up working really well. I double checked the height on these and they were perfect. This was my first modified attempt at the process. It works pretty well, but I further refine it as I go forward. I don't like the round tops on these, so that design changes after the first set. This is one of those times where something in your head doesn't translate to the final product. This thing looked just like a Dremel bit to me, so we can scrap that idea. So I found this scrap piece of walnut laying around and I was like, oh, that would be kind of cool. So then I cut these to see how this works. And I think that looks pretty good. I realized gluing these first ones on that they really just wanted to slide around. I refined the process a little bit later for this, but you have to start somewhere. Here is where it really began to sink in that I had made a good decision on the changes. I moved from a 45-degree bit to a 30-degree bit. With making the top shorter and adding the legs, it really just filled these out. And it left that bevel ending about halfway down the bottom section. I had a few tops that needed epoxy work, so I figured I'd go ahead and knock them out together. So you know when people say something goes flawlessly? If you look at this actually went, I guess, flawfully, because there's a ton of little bubbles in this. The good thing is it actually kind of looks like mica, so we'll just say that it's that. Also to note, I poured these in layers with the tinted at the bottom and then clear on the top. I wanted it to have that depth. Next, I used double-sided tape to put these on a board and run them through the sander very lightly. I used one of the extra tops as a template, double-sided taped it down, and then used a trim router to just trim up the edges where the epoxy had stretched out a little bit. This is another example of refining the process to make it faster and safer. I added a board on the top, that way it would hold it down in place. Then I was able to slide these across effortlessly, using the back of the fence to turn these around. This change really made sense, so I wound up using this on the top and the bottom. This was just a way better process. Here I confidently show you I need to drill a hole in this, and then somehow don't record it. I'm embarrassed to even show this. This is just painful. It only takes a minute of that hand cramping work for you to come up with a better way. This is pretty simple. I just carefully turn this thing around on the sandpaper and it gets it nice and smooth. So here's the first design. I didn't like that this was so tall. Then this one, I felt like this one was out of proportion with the top and still started to make this smaller. Here I got the top smaller, but I didn't like this much space at the bottom. On this one, I tried to split the difference of the height of this. With these, I added the legs, kind of an afterthought, and I really liked them. And this one, I changed from a 45 bit to like a 30 bit or whatever. And I really like that taper, so this is going to be the final design. I'm going to keep the legs, but you get the picture. This scrap looks like something they'd use on Mission Impossible to jump and hang on something with. I wonder. Yeah, probably not. When cleaning up the bottom of the pockets, I just used a straight razor to scrape off any imperfections and then used it to cut off any nibs that were left. I just kept refining the process and everything got faster and faster. This was mainly for the body of the game and the biggest enhancements were to come. But there is something I've been wanting to do for months. As some people may know, I've been riding bikes on ramps since I was a kid. I was recently at the pump track and somebody left a broken skateboard deck there. Now, I've never tried this. Oh, this is gonna suck, isn't it? If you've never tried to get skateboard grip tape off, I can tell you, it's on there pretty good. Imagine trying to get gum off your shoe, but your shoe is like 30 inches long by 8 inches wide. When I got done pulling this grip tape off, my hands felt like crab claws. Oh gosh, brutal. I was definitely glad to be done with that. I had absolutely no idea of how much glue this would take. I'm sure this is overkill. Another thing to note, I wouldn't have even thought about using a skateboard deck had I not watched a bunch of Wobie Designs videos over the years. I feel like those projects are kind of the benchmark for old skateboard juice. Now that the glue dried, it was time to level up another part of this project. Remember how I said I was debating on selling some of these? If I do, this process needs to be super efficient. So here I batch 10 together, then use a combination square, that way I can replicate the cuts. While these doweling jigs make great affiliate links, they're a lot less impressive at making dowels, especially if you're trying to make a dowel out of a laminated skateboard deck. These were kind of hard to glue together, and I had no idea if they'd work. I still don't know how rugged they are. If you know something better to glue these together, please let me know, because I just don't. All this jig was I ripped a little pocket in one direction, ripped one perpendicular so the glue wouldn't stick together, and then just used that for alignment. This feels like it glued pretty well, but I'm not sure how strong that bond is. Still not bad though. Of course it's gonna make me work to get this thing out of here. And that is the exact reason I let this thing hollow and put a stop at the end. To sand this, I just chucked it in the drill and hit some sandpaper with it. It works pretty well and they look really neat. I'm not sure whether I'd include it with a set. If I did, I'd probably put a replacement piece in case the wood broke off. Ooh, that is a mess. Here I'm cutting off the high edges of the concave. This way when I run it through the sander, there's not as much to take off. I needed to get one side of this perfectly flat, but I also needed it to be as level as possible. This is why I didn't use the joiner. I needed it to take an equal amount off of both sides. Oh yeah. That's not going anywhere. Once one side was perfectly flat and even, I could just take it over to the planer and flatten the other side. I must have flipped this thing around 15 times trying to figure out exactly where I wanted to lay this out. Well, it is decided. I have one shot at this cut. There's a little snipe right here, so I barely made it in the thing. Man, this is going to be close. I was very careful laying this out, but my Onefinity sometimes, it just has gremlins. This was close. The y-axis was perfect, but it cut the x-axis off by about 1/4 of an inch. It is what it is. Another refinement in the process was me sanding on this oscillating sander. All I had to do was take my time, work my way around. This was super fast, super clean. On these sanders, there's a little space between the back belt wheel and that flat sanding surface. That little cubby was perfect for sanding these radiuses. I seriously considered trying to use a thick piece of acrylic for the top of this. That way you could see the green through. But I was just a little hesitant because I wasn't sure I could actually pull it off. The good thing is this figured walnut looks really good on here. Since I was using spray finish, I still wanted the inside of these holes to get finish on them. So I actually just used a water-based lacquer, and I found these nifty little foam Q-tip things. They're about an 1/8 inch wide, and they are perfect for this. They don't leave any lint. It's rare that I would suggest something, but if you do small things where you need these are pretty good ones.
Should work.
Another thing you'll notice, these already had finish on them. I knew I was going to have to sand them a little bit and put a final coat on them, so I did this before that. I originally used Danish oil on these, but I switched over to an oil-based poly just because it was easier to spray it on. So now it's time to reveal the fruits of the labor. So this has been a kind of drawn out process. It wasn't because it took a whole lot of time, it was because I didn't have a whole lot of free time. So I'm looking for opinions. Which one of these was your favorite and why? Do you think the changes I made were better than the beginning or worse? I also really want to give a few of these away to followers of the channel. I'm going to try to figure out exactly how to do that. If you have an idea, let me know. Once I get a clear path forward on how to do this, I'll probably post in the comments here how it's going to go down. I'd like to thank everybody for watching, and if you've made it this far in the video, like and subscribe.